I'm a fisherman like you guys and gals. You know, I grew up in the southern part of Alabama, fishing in a family lake that went around our house for largemouth bass, brim, and shellcracker. And we would spend every summer in North Carolina, and I watched fly fishermen like you guys, and it really intrigued me. So I went home when I was like 9 years old and bought a fly rod. And I think I was the only person in South Alabama with a fly rod, but that's where I learned to cast and everything. And I learned what a religious experience it was to catch a 6 or 7 pound largemouth bass on a 9 foot Garcia on a yellow popping bug. I mean, it lit my fuse for fly fishing, and I'm still that way. I'd love chasing even brim, shellcracker, or perch, and bass, even stripers here in Georgia, on Lake Lanier and some of the others. So when I moved to Georgia, in the North Georgia mountains north of Atlanta in Dahlonega, I actually was part of chartering a Trout Unlimited chapter, called the Gold Rush chapter. And so I've been, you know, a charter member, past president, board members, and everything of the Gold Rush chapter. I love fishing out west also, especially in the Rockies and the Cascades and the Sierras. I got challenged after fishing the rivers and streams of Virginia and Carolina to write a book. And one of the guys that challenged me to do this was a guy by the name of Mark Woods, the superintendent of Blue Ridge Parkway, who's also a fly fisherman, although not a very good fly fisherman. And he thought it was a great idea, and I told him, I think you should do it. He said, no, I think you should do it. So after a couple of years of wrangling back and forth, 2 years later, I had finished this book, and as it turned out, according to my publisher, it's a first-in-class book in that there's not another book about fly fishing the Blue Ridge Parkway. There are little short stories and websites and little pamphlets and things like that. But as far as a comprehensive guide of fishing the Parkway, there's not one. So I think that's been why this book has become so popular. The other thing I do, another one of my bad habits, according to my wife, is that I'm a bamboo rod maker, and I've been in 2 bamboo rod companies, and we've made hundreds of rods for LL Bean, their double L rod, for Wright McGill, the Granger rods. We own all the Granger tapers, and for collectors and, you know, fly fishermen and women all over the world. And so made quite a few bamboo rods. I love making it as a business consultant. You know, I'm fascinated by process. So I really get into that. And as a member of the Southern Highland Craft Guild in Asheville, I demonstrate bamboo rod making for the National Park Service and the Folk Arts Center there in Asheville several times a year, as well as in Blowing Rock at the Cone Manor. I'm a freelance writer for Eastern Fly Fishing Magazine. In fact, the current issue, the September-October issue of Fly Fishing Magazine, American Fly Fishing Magazine, I've got an article in there about Courthouse Creek. I'm sure some of you are aware of Courthouse Creek. I think it's a really great little trout stream. And so I've got an article in there about that. And I am a member of the Outdoor Writers Association of America, as well as the Georgia Outdoor Writers Association. Aside from all this, in my free time, I'm an equity partner in a group called the Newport LLC, and we're a late-stage emerging growth, lower mid-market advisory group for enterprises wanting to buy, sell, trade, scale their business. A lot of private equity portfolio companies and investment banking work and things like that. So I've got a pretty busy time, but I always find time to fly fish. And so tonight, thanks to the Carolina Fly Fishing Club and Stephanie reaching out, last year, actually, I believe is when she originally reached out, we scheduled the meeting to come up and actually present this program to you live, and then COVID changed all that. So I have the pleasure of talking to you tonight about two things I have a real passion for, one being fly fishing, and secondly, the other is the Blue Ridge Parkway that I have a real affinity for. And so I can combine all of this into one discussion about a book, and it's the book that this whole thing is based on, being a first-in-class book. It was forwarded by Mark Woods, and I don't know if any of you guys know this guy or know of him, but he retired a couple of years ago, and is just a super guy. Lives in Kentucky, also has a place in Waynesville, North Carolina, west of Asheville. Big hiker, kind of a fly fisherman. I gave him a bamboo fly rod, hoping he'd learn to fish better, but he's still struggling, struggling with that. But a really good guy and a great help to me, and accessing a lot of the vintage and antique images that are in the book about the Parkway, and access to a lot of the data that I needed that was enclosed in their archives, as well as the National Park Service. It's about a 308-page book with 145 color images. It's a lot about the Parkway history, and an overview of the overall Parkway, a couple of chapters about it that you'll probably learn something about. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it later on. I have one whole chapter devoted to trout. Not that you would probably want to spend a lot of time in there, because as a fly fisher person, you already know about brook brown and rainbow trout. But what I have found is that in the research I did on this book, almost half of the people buying this book are people who are buying it because of the Blue Ridge Parkway, and they're trying to learn more about the Parkway and the waters on the Parkway, and they think the only trout around the Blue Ridge Parkway are rainbow trout, because that's what they see in the restaurants. So they have no idea about brook trout, and they have very little awareness of brown trout. So I do include a lot in there about where those fish came from, how they got here, what they're like, their habits, and genealogy and things like that. I get into the hydrology of the Parkway, how the Parkway gets why does it get so much water? And when it gets it, what does it do with it? And I know that's kind of it sounds real rhetorical and simple, but it's really a complex system that has a lot to do with the weather, the topography, elevations, and everything. So I get into that. You might, if you want to, you might learn something and make you kind of interesting around the campfire. I divide the 252 miles of the North Carolina section of the Parkway into 4 63-mile sections. And then I'm able to divide each of those sections up by the number of rivers and streams and creeks and everything that I want to write about. It helps organize it instead of just listing out a big list of creeks and rivers and streams for you to go through. It gives you some idea from mile marker post to mile marker post where those creeks are. And I'm going to show you those sections in just a few minutes. I provide extremely detailed descriptions and access data about each one, along with a lot of history. I tell you about where the local outfitters are that can tell you what kind of bugs most of these fish are eating at any given time, where the lodging is, campgrounds, food, and breweries and cigar shops. Because those to me are the foundations of a good watershed. If you got to have a place to stay, someplace to eat, someplace to drink, and something to smoke. And if you got all those things, I have found that makes for a pretty good place to fish. So that's a little bit about the book. If anybody's interested in the book, you can get it at my website. If I go back at wildbearings.com. Of course, you can get it. Most of the outfitters, there we go. Most of the outfitters up and down the Parkway are stocking my book. In fact, 26 just in North Carolina alone. But if you want to get it from my website, I'll be happy to sign it for you, and that'll bring you good luck. I promise you. So that's all I'm going to say about books. Now let's talk for a few minutes about the Parkway itself. As most of you probably know, this is a long strip of asphalt that starts in Cherokee, North Carolina, and runs all the way up into Virginia at Waynesville for 469 continuous miles, 252 in North Carolina and 217 in Virginia. And it was designed originally to connect Shenandoah National Park with the Great Smoky Mountain National Park that had just been completed. Back in the early 30s, about 1932, 33, Harry Flood Byrd, a senator in Virginia, was at the Shenandoah National Park with President Roosevelt. Now keep in mind, this was in the depth of the Depression. And he recommended to Roosevelt that, hey, why don't we connect the newly commissioned Great Smoky Mountain National Park with Shenandoah National Park? Well, Roosevelt, being the progressive he is, said, you know what, that's a hell of an idea. Not only can we do something good for the region and create a legacy and a new national park, but we can create a huge number of new jobs that can help revitalize the economy of that era. So for about 2 years, the wrangling between Virginia, the path was pretty much determined. But the big question was, will it go through North Carolina or will it go through Tennessee? And that was a huge fight between those two groups. Primarily between the groups in Asheville and the people in Knoxville and Nashville somewhat. But in the end, the Department of Interior said, you know what, Tennessee, you've got the TVA. That's all you're going to get. We're going to put the Parkway in North Carolina. So that's kind of the long and short of how it got in North Carolina. It is the world's longest and narrowest national park with almost 88,000 acres and about 4,000 miles of border around it, which is a lot of border. The interesting thing to me is that there's 26 tunnels, almost 13,270 feet of tunnels that were blasted through igneous and metamorphic rock, a very hard rock. And this was done, remember, in the early part of the last century when a lot of stuff was not as automated as it is now. And it's just a marvel of engineering. Of the 26 tunnels, get this, 25 of these are in North Carolina alone. There's 100 miles of trout water on there. The only other thing I'll say about it, other than budget, is that the climate zones can be extremely ranging. For instance, just from Asheville, you go north 19 miles as the crow flies to Mount Mitchell, and you have the same number of climate zones as from Asheville up to Ontario. There's 4 of those. So you can leave Asheville and it can be 70 degrees. You get up the top of Mount Mitchell and it can be 39 to the low 40s. I've seen it snowing in July on top of Mount Mitchell. So it's got a great climate zone. And what does that mean? That translates to good trout fishing, really. The budget for the Blue Ridge Parkway is really astounding. Only $16 million a year. And they have 250 employees, 469 miles to maintain, along with a lot of buildings and places like that. Has a $1.4 billion economic impact. And it has the largest visitorship of any national park in the country, around 14 to 15 million. It's going to be up this year because of COVID, because people aren't working, they're out driving around. So it's probably going to be closer to 15 or 16. So that's a little bit about the Parkway. I thought you might find it interesting that I just kind of pulled out of the book. I wanted to also show you some images, some vintage images. This image is from back in the 40s of Courthouse Tunnel, which goes through Courthouse Peak on the Parkway, very close to one of the highest points. And Courthouse Creek, excuse me, this is Devil's Courthouse, yeah. And below it is Courthouse Creek. So that's very appropriate. This is a great image. What I did, I went and took the same image from the same perspective on the same scale, Stephanie, and put them side by side to compare. And it's really interesting because, 50, 60 years later, you notice this rock that's got a lot of silica in it. You can still see that silica shining through. And it's just, it's a beautiful tunnel. When you get in this area, there's a lot of fly fishing around there. This is some of the vintage images I secured from the National Park Service archives that Mark helped me have access to. This guy's, dropping dynamite, a DuPont dynamite, got 2 cases of dynamite here. He's dropping it down, and the packer, it then takes a rod and rams it down in there, and they pack about 4 or 5 sticks in there, and then they put a primer in it and run like heck. Well, the way this made my book is, if you notice, the guy dropping the dynamite is smoking a pipe, and I just thought that really was pretty cool. The OSHA wasn't around back in those days. Up close to you guys, kind of close to you, or closer to you than there, is Stone Mountain State Park. And a lot of people don't know that in the 60s and 70s, there was a sky tram that went between 2 peaks across Bullhead Creek on the Parkway. And it was a huge tourist attraction up there. And this is an image that I had known existed. And when I approached the curator for the National Park Service to find some of these images, she said there was no tram on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I said, I promise you there was. And she said, I promise you there was not. So this is the curator for all the national parks. And I'm standing this woman down, and it kind of gets in, and she finally says, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll do a query in our database, and I'll reach out to you if I find anything. Well, 2 weeks later, I get a zip file from Susan that had 1,200 images of this tram, everything from the starting station to a gift shop to everything. And she was so apologetic and so thankful. And she said, thanks for letting me know. I know something now I didn't know. And anyway, I'll tell you more about that when we get to the Bullhead Creek discussion we're going to have. This is a typical view, as you've seen. They're around every corner. The parkway was designed, really, the pathway was designed not by a bunch of surveyors just going up and finding the quickest way around. It was designed by actually a landscape architect. And every move was designed to create a viewpoint. The Lincoln Viaduct was the last stretch of the parkway back in 1987. It opened. And 50 years after the Blue Ridge Parkway was started in 1935, it was finished. Hugh Morton had held out forever, and I know you probably all know this story, but held out for the bridge to be levitated over the backside of Grandfather Mountain to not destroy the really very precious topography and flora and fauna. And he finally won, and so they did. And I was catching trout under this bridge last Friday on some of the creeks that run on it and around it. So it's a beautiful area. Last thing I'll show you before we get into trout fishing is this is a timeline of the Blue Ridge Parkway being built all the way from Waynesville down to Cherokee, North Carolina. This is the state line. And it was built in a hopscotch manner. It wasn't built from one end to the other. It was built for when they could buy the land, have it surveyed, get the people on it that lived on it off, fight all the lawsuits, and build roads into it where they could get bulldozers and cranes and crews up there to build it. So they kind of did all the easy stuff first and then did all the hard stuff last. And so that's the way the parkway was built. When you can see this image up close, I've got it in the book, but when you can see the main image up close, it's a fascinating image to take a look at. Just a word about the trout, because you know about trout. I'm not going to spend any time really describing these trout and who they are. I mean, you know what a Salvelinus fontinalis is. It's the native brook trout. It was the only trout native to the Appalachians before logging of the last century. And this is a trout I caught up off of Wilson Creek, actually off Stack Rock a couple of years ago. Real pretty. And then, of course, you know, you've seen these little fellows too. And this is what most people think of when they think of a brook trout, because it's about the size a lot of people catch up in these headwaters. Brown trout are rainbows. This is a rainbow up in the Smoky Mountain National Park on the Raven Fork above the Koala Indian Reservation. There's a gorge back up in there you can hike into, which is very dangerous to get into. By the way, don't go by yourself. I do talk about it in the book, but I don't encourage you to go to that stretch. I encourage you to take trails around it and put in above it and then go to the headwaters. But this was about a 15 or 16 inch wild rainbow that I caught up there, and they're up there. But you know, this is the typical size rainbow that you see. And notice how fat that fish was. And then lastly, the brown trout. You know, we love to catch these browns. They're bully, and they get big, they eat other fish, they act ugly, and they kind of dominate the pools they're in. Even in this size, you know, they'll dominate a drop pool that's, you know, 8 or 10 feet across, and you won't see a lot of rainbows or brook trout in that pool. So that's, you know, I spend more time with other groups because they're fascinated by the fish, you know, and I know you guys and gals already know about the fish. I always get asked, what do you fish with, Sam? Well, my go-to rod is an 8-foot 5-weight LL Bean double L. And it's just one of the rods that we've made made LL Bean down through the years. And it's just, it's an exceptional casting rod. Is short enough for most of the streams, but it's got enough backbone for the lower Davidson, for instance. So it's kind of my go-to bigger rod for the streams. My second rod is a 7-foot 4-weight F.E. Thomas taper that I made, and it doesn't look like this now. It's all beat the heck up, but this is a great rod too from F.E. Thomas taper that I built. So I fish with a 4 or 5 weight generally, and I do have 2 and 3 weights that I fish with that are 6.5 or 7 foot rods. But as a rule, these 2 rods will be close to me anytime I get up on the Parkway and I'm chasing trout. And people say, well, what kind of bugs do you use, Sam? Well, you know, I believe my ideology about entomology is that all of these streams are very poor in productivity. The limestone, you know, there's not a lot of limestone. It's not like going to the Holston River where you turn a rock over and the whole bottom is moving because there's so many bugs. They turn these rocks over in the Davidson River or Wildcat or Wilson or any of those, and you may see 1 or 2 bugs crawling around. Well, I feel like there's about 5 dry flies, you know, like a caddis is my primary bug that I'll use when I'm fishing dry dropper, and I'll drop, you know, a wet bug underneath it. But sulfurs, BWOs, of course, some type of stimulator or royal wolf is generally, or even an Adams. Those are probably the 6 that I'll go to. And then on the wet flies, you know, mostly soft hackle and bead-headed prince, hare's ear. There's about 5 or 6 of those patterns that I go under. So I start out dry dropper, and then I migrate to one or the other based on what I'm getting. And then I cover a lot of water. I don't stand around, you know, wearing a drop pool out or a big pool out, tying flies on. I start out, and you know, if I cast into a reasonably sized drop pool, and I don't get a strike in the first 2 or 3 casts, I move on. I got buddies that'll sit there and tie on bugs for 45 minutes, and they'll catch a fish. But I'll catch more fish because I cover more water faster, and I'm just impatient that way, and that works for me. It's not the right way to do it, but it's my way of doing it. So that's what I fish with and the bugs I fish with. I'd like to tell you now, well, I guess I can pause right now, Stephanie. If anyone's got a question, if there are any chat questions or anything, I'll be happy to answer those right now.
Okay, thanks. I just, added a little comment in the chat to let everyone know they can ask questions throughout there in the chat. So far, no questions, but this
Okay.
is great information. I love that you included the history of the Blue Ridge Parkway there. I didn't know much of that, and it really brings a new meaning, and some perspective when you're out fishing these streams, when you understand the history of it.
Well, it really does, and that's the reason I included it. And I normally will get on the soapbox a little bit more about funding and, your senators and your congressmen and everyone, because they control it. And if they don't know that the Parkway needs money, they just keep cutting. And if any of you driven the Parkway lately, you understand the condition of the asphalt. You know that many of the facilities are closed because they just can't keep them open. They don't have the people or the money to keep them going, to keep it going and to repair it. They got almost half a trillion dollars, $500 billion in deferred repairs right now. It's absolutely
Wow.
crazy the amount of, no, excuse me, $500 million, not trillion. They have $500 million, almost $1 billion in deferred repair. And fortunately, Congress did get together on something, last month and passed the Great American Outdoors Act. And that provided a lot of funding, and a huge amount went to the Parkway. So that's all I'm going to say about it. Now, Section 1 of the Blue Ridge Parkway, as you probably know, starts in Cherokee, and it goes all the way over to a place just under Asheville called Buck Springs on the Parkway. Now, you got Brevard down here, you got Asheville up here, and you've got Mount Pisgah here, which is the second highest peak, east of the Rockies. And there's this Buck Springs place is a very special place that I'm going to tell you about later when we come back and talk about the creek that's along there. Buck Springs was the location of someone that you're very familiar with, and his name is George Vanderbilt. And when I ask most people, what do you know about George Vanderbilt? And they say, well, he had a big pad, in Asheville, great big place in Asheville that he moved down from the north. He was a railroad tycoon, and he built this big house. Well, a lot of people don't know that he built another great big house at Buck Springs up on the ridge facing his estate or his chalet in Asheville. And I'm going to show you some pictures of that came out of the National Archives that I think you'll probably find interesting, and tell you a little story about the only remaining building that's on site that you can see. But this 63-mile section is Section 1. I'm going to come back after I talk about the other sections and tell you about this creek right here. That is one of my favorite creeks that I hope that if you haven't fished it, you will fish it. Okay, Section 2 picks up from Buck Springs, runs through Asheville, below Weaverville, and right off the south face of Mount Mitchell, north of Black Mountain, up to just past Highway 80, coming up from Marion to Spruce Pine. That 63-mile section has some incredible water on it, really high elevations, really very unique and historic national forest land around it. This piece of area right here was the first, on Curtis Creek, was the first acquisition of the National Forest Service east of the Mississippi. The Weeks Act was passed, which allowed them to use public money to go buy public land. And because before then, there was no national forest east of the Mississippi River before the 30s. So that was a big deal that allowed them to get that done. From Highway 80 below Spruce Pine, it runs up just south of Spruce Pine through Linville Gorge, through Linville the town, just south of Banner Elk and Tynecastle, then through Blowing Rock, and then up to E.B. Jeffrey State Park, which is getting closer to all your neck of the woods, at least coming northeast of there. This is probably, to me, some of the most productive trout fishing on the Parkway. Just given Grandfather Mountain and all of the water on the south face here, which includes Wilson Creek, Stack Rock Creek, Fletcher's, Little Stack Rock, a little Wilson, and then Buck's Timber Branch that I'm going to tell you about in just a few minutes. An interesting piece of trivia here that you might be interested in is that just north of Linville, there's a little community called Tynecastle, and the road off of 105 splits and goes up to Banner Elk and Sugar Mountain. Well, about 100 yards up that road, you can take a rock and throw as hard as you can off the left side, and you'll be throwing that rock into the headwaters of the Linville River. And then you can turn around and throw a rock on the right side of the road as hard as you can, and you're throwing that rock into the headwaters of the Watauga River. Now that's significant just in the fact that they're that close together. But the interesting thing to me is those two great and storied trout streams or trout rivers, the Watauga flows north and goes into the Gulf of Mexico, and the Linville River flows south-southwest and will wind up in the Atlantic Ocean. So you can stand on that one road and you have two great waters that flow into two different parts of the ocean. And I just think that's crazy amazing. And they're both really good trout streams all over. And the final section, as I included in the book, it goes from E.B. Jeffrey State Park for 62 miles up to the Virginia-North Carolina state line. And of course, the Parkway continues on for another 170 some odd miles up to Waynesville. But it ends here at the state line just under Galac. And there's a creek right there, it runs right under it, called Chestnut Creek. If none of you have ever fished that creek, it is a supreme brook trout stream. And I mean big brook trout you'll find in that stream. This creek, this stretch of the Parkway, most of the water that I write about is on the south face of this ridge. And you got Stone Mountain State Park, E.B. Jeffries, you got Thurman Wilderness area here, and it's just littered with one trout stream after the other. And the creek that I'm going to talk about here is Bullhead Creek, and I'm going to show you some really interesting things about that. Now, if you don't have any questions about those sections and my logic in doing that, now I'm going to tell you about 4 different watersheds. One in section 1, one in section 2, and then 3 and 4 that are some of the ones that may be my favorite, or maybe ones that are kind of the least known of, that very few people really fish, but they're really great trout streams. The first one, if you're familiar with the East Fork of the Pigeon River, the East Fork and the West Fork come together just under Waynesville, North Carolina, to form the Pigeon River, and it flows north into Tennessee, and then into the Tennessee River, and then goes into, where the Holston and all those connect, the French Broad, and then goes west. I rank this river, the section that I'm writing about, a 5, because it's got just incredible mainstream and tributaries coming off of it. On each of the waters that I show you, I put the GPS fixes for the source, as well as the mouth fix, so that you can cut and paste these or put them in, and it'll, your map program will take you right to that. I show you the elevations also of where those are. So the size, I describe the size, either small, medium, or large, which is subjective, but the East Fork going under Highway 276, where I started from, is a pretty large creek going underneath there. It has 4 really good tributaries. 2 headwaters, the Yellowstone Prong and Dark Prong, form the headwaters, come together to form the East Fork. And then it has Greasy Prong and Shining Prong, are really 2 of the larger tributaries that are all extremely fishable. I'm going to show you images of these. The gradient for the main stretch of the stream, I describe it as a 3.9%. And so what happens if you take at the end of that line, you see 850 feet, which is the amount of elevation gain from the source to the mouth, and divide it by the number of feet in 4.1 miles, you'll come up with a percentage. And that's how I come up with it. And as an analogy, if you take a 10-foot 2x4 and you raise it 1 foot on one end, that's a 10% gradient. And that's a simple way of getting your head around what I do. This is very significant when you look at the streams I describe and look at the gradient. Some of these streams go up to 18%, 20%. I start stressing at about 16%, and I'm in pretty good shape. Some of the guys in my Trout Unlimited chapter, you get up to 7 or 8, 9. They're huffing and going into a vapor lock and heading downstream to get into thinner air. But I just find it very helpful to know what you're getting into. The effort is just a function of what kind of shape you're in and the gradient. And that translates to the amount of effort that it takes to stay on that stream. Pressure, you know what pressure is. None of us like it. I put on there generally what you can expect for pressure, and this stream has slight to none, and the tributaries have like none. I've never, as long as I've been fishing these tributaries, I have never had another fisherman around me that I could see, other than someone that I took with me. Also, the fishing quality, as I describe it, and then I'll tell you which trout are in there, brook browns or rainbows or all of them. And then I'll provide a huge amount of data as how do you get to the source, the mouth, and someplace in between on this creek. So let's start with the overview of the East Fork of the Pigeon River. And here's the Blue Ridge Parkway. Here's Waynesville, North Carolina up here, about 15, 20 miles. Here's Brevard down here off the screen, about 12, 15 miles. And this is Graveyard Fields. This is Shining Rock Wilderness. They all 18,000 acres of it. And in the Middle Prong Wilderness. So you got the Parkway paralleling this creek. And here's the structure of the creek. You've got Yellowstone Prong comes out of the Balsam Ridge over here, out of black balsams, which turns the water kind of a tannin tea color, very light tea color, very beautiful water. And it flows over 4 waterfalls. The first Upper Falls, which is a big slide that as it comes out and really starts becoming fishable. And then about 2 miles below that is the Second Falls. And there's a parking area right here on the Blue Ridge Parkway that all the Ashevilleans and all the other rock hoppers from neighboring communities come and park. And they love to come down here and hike through Graveyard Fields and to play in the water just below this bridge. And that's about the only place they really affect. About a half a mile below there, quarter mile actually, is Yellowstone Falls, which is a very beautiful falls. Both Second Falls and Yellowstone are beautiful, big falls. I'm going to show you images of those. And then my favorite waterfall on this creek is Skinny Dip Falls, and I'll show you the reason for that later on. The second headwater of the East Fork is Dark Prong. Now, where Yellowstone Prong has crazy good access with a good trail system, it parallels the Parkway. There's all kind of trails going down to it. It's easily fishable. Dark Prong is just the opposite of that. The trail system sucks. You got to bushwhack your way up most of it. You can do it, but you're going to be doing most of your hiking up through the water, up the creek. But it is absolutely loaded with brook trout. And it's a relatively good sized creek. So your casting is open all the way up about a mile, starts closing in a little bit by then. And then you can get up here and catch this ridge trail and come back to your car on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and then get back down to your car wherever you parked along here. let me say a little bit, as a fly fisherman and as someone who has cracked the age of 60, I've learned some tricks about how to work the system, getting back to your car. And I write about this in the book. And what I have found is that when you hike back to the Blue Ridge Parkway or any Forest Service road, anything away from your car, wherever you're fishing, if you'll walk back to the right of way of the road and just start limping, whether you're limping or not, but act like you're limping and act like you're just totally worn out, and just look absolutely disheveled, I guarantee you the first or second car or truck that comes along will stop and ask you, are you okay? Do you need a ride? You need water, food, medical attention, whatever? And all you got to say is, no, I'm okay, but you know what? My car is about a mile down the road. Could I have a ride? 100% of the time, they'll say, sure. And they'll almost come help you in the back of the car, So I've found that that's a great way to get back when you're fishing some of these creeks. It's shameless, but I do it.
Great tactic there.
Yeah.
We did have a question come in,
okay.
Sam. What size caddis or dry and droppers should be used mostly?
That's a great question. And I'm a big believer in 14 or 16. Even down to a 12 sometimes. But as a rule, I'll fish a 14 or a 16. And these wild fish, and you'll see some of the images that I'll show you, it'll be a 6 or 7 inch rainbow or brook or brown, and there'll be a 14 or 12 in their mouth. They're so hungry, if they can get it in their mouth, they'll hit it. So those are the sizes I use on subsurface bugs. I typically go with a 16 or 18 as a general rule. So I hope that answered your question. I'm very unsophisticated, kind of like a Jimmy Jacobs kind of guy. I'm simple with bugs. If I find out they're hitting other bugs, my friends are catching more fish on some exotic bug they tied, I'll loan them one of my rods and bum flies off of them. I tie about 10 patterns of bugs, and that's all I have time to tie. So these two creeks come together to form the East Fork of the Pigeon River. And where that happens, it flows through a magnificent gorge down to Highway 2 or up to Highway 276. That's coming from off the Parkway from Brevard up to Waynesville, North Carolina. And that's about a 4.1 mile stretch from the source of it all the way down to this creek here, or the road where I'll show you where it goes under. There is a great trail system that parallels it all of the way, along with 1 or 2 access points. There's only about 2 or 3 trails going down because of the topography coming off of the Parkway. But there's a great trail going down to the mouth that helps you get on this creek, and there's total access from the source and the mouth on the trail going parallel to it. So those are great. Now, the Greasy Prong is another tributary. It's not a source creek. It's a tributary. It comes in below. It's 1.8 miles long, and Greasy Prong, unlike Dark Prong, does have a partial trail that goes most of the way up it. It's not a great trail, but you can use it to get around some of the obstructions on it, some of the falls that you can't get over, and fish. It too is loaded with brook trout. The mouth, you'll find some rainbows and browns will hang around there, but the brook trout have learned how to live up in this Shining Rock wilderness, and they've done a really good job of it on that creek. And the last creek, appropriately named Shining Creek, comes from the highest elevations in Shining Rock Wilderness and runs for about 1.8 miles all the way down to about a mile roughly above Highway 276. There is a trail system along it. It departs it periodically. That is a rugged stream to fish. The topography can get kind of ugly. I had one guy kept bugging me for several years will you please take me fishing? And this went on forever. I really didn't want to take him fishing because he's a lousy fisherman, and he just is very needy, you know. And so finally I broke down and said, okay, all right, let's go. I took him to Shining Creek. He never asked me again to take him fishing. That was the last time. So anyway, that's the schematic of the East Fork of the Pigeon. Now, I'd like to show you some images starting where the East Fork goes under Highway 276, and you're looking easterly here. This is early in the morning. The fog had lifted, and the morning sun started coming down on the east side of this culvert. This is not just any culvert. You would think that you're walking into the entrance of NORAD. This thing is about 30, 35 feet wide and probably 20 or 25 feet high. It is a huge structure. I have no idea how they built this thing and kept the trees and the road on top of it. It looks like it was bored to me. I mean, I don't know how they did it. But anyway, in the middle of the day, when the fish quit biting out on the streams, if you experience that, come under this culvert and fish up against these walls, and there's always browns and rainbows kind of hanging up against there. The water, there's no holes in this culvert. It's dark in here, and it's about maybe 75 or 100 feet long, but there are no holes in here. And by holes, I mean anything over, you know, thigh deep. And the fish come in here to hang out, and it's just a great place to fish, I think. Now, if you turn around and look upstream, this is kind of what it looks like. This is kind of the average width of the East Fork in September. In October, it's down to about 10 or 12, maybe 15 feet. You can also tell that from here over here it can get up another 25, 30, 40 feet over to the bank of this little valley over here. I have been standing here fishing, hearing thunderstorms upstream a mile or so. And by the time I got to this rock, I could see birds flying east and west, getting, you know, spooked. And you start hearing, you can't really tell what you're hearing, but you can hear something. And the hair starts standing up on the back of your neck. And when the hair stands up on the back of the neck, that's your subconscious saying, run like hell. And that's what you better do, because about 45 seconds after I felt that, the water was 6 feet deep in this area right here. The flash flood came through here that quick. So I'm just warning you that even though there's a trail over here that you could get on real quick, there's a trail over here. Pay attention to what's happening on these mountain streams above you, because what's happening above you is eventually going to come down to you. And if it's a big thunderstorm that's dropping a lot of water, you can get in trouble very quickly. This is typical brown trout that you'll catch along this stretch of the East Fork. This fish was about 7 to 9 inches long, very aggressive, just a beautiful fish, and there's lots of them. This is a rock called Holy Moly Rock. This is about maybe, I think it's about a mile upstream. And the short story is this rock, which is about a 30-ton rock that you can see the drill marks in it where it was drilled for dynamite. This came from about 700 feet above in elevation and roughly a half a mile away in lateral run down the side of the mountain. And this happened supposedly back in the 30s when they were building this stretch of the Parkway. And there was an old squirrel hunter down fishing or hunting this part of the creek. And when the engineers torched off the dynamite charge, this huge boulder just kind of tipped over and started rolling downhill. Well, when you're 30 tons and you're going down a 45-degree incline, you know, after about a half a mile, you've built up a lot of speed. And the old timer could hear it coming, and he was scared to death because it was shaking the ground. He could hear, you know, 10 and 12-inch white oak trees just splintering into toothpicks. And he could hear it getting louder and louder and closer and closer. And finally, it burst through the rhododendrons and the trees about 50 feet in front of him and landed right in the middle of the stream, or right where it is right now. And after the dust settled and the foam went down and all the leaves and splinters settled, he screamed, "Holy blanking moly," and hit his knees. It scared him so bad. And so the story goes that he went up shaking and put his finger in that hole. And he described and told his friends when he got home that I could still feel the ignition flash of the dynamite. And so the legend goes now that if you go up to this rock when you see it and stick your finger in it, it brings you good luck. So every time I go by there, I stick my finger in it and say, "Holy moly." And I think I have better luck because of it. So as you move upstream from that, you can see, you would think you're in a Scottish or an Irish forest fishing for brown trout, because this is kind of what it looks like later in the afternoon or early morning. These drop pools are just beautiful. Every one of these drop pools and riffles and runs hold fish, and it's just easy to fish up this stretch right here. As you get up to Greasy Prong, this is a tree across the mouth of Greasy Prong. As it comes into, it kind of closes it up, makes it look smaller than it is. This creek's actually about 12 feet across here. This tree is, the diameter of this tree through the center is about 7 feet. It is a huge tree. I believe it is an old chestnut tree that the loggers cut, but it was so big they couldn't skid it out of here for some reason. And they didn't cut it, try to break it down and skid it out any other way. So when I was 9 years old, fishing this part of the creek with my father, that tree was there. And as a kid, I would go up there and walk across that tree as a kid, and I can still do that, and it's still as hard as, it's like it's made of concrete. So you could probably get 4 inches into that tree, and it would be almost like virgin wood, chestnut wood again. So that's the kind of stuff you see down there. There's another little brook trout called last fall at the mouth of that creek. This is a tree at mile marker 417. Very unique. It's called, appropriately named, Deerhead Tree. And it's standing, supposedly was a Native American marker tree. This thing is, I mean, if I stand underneath the nose of this deer, I only come up to within about a foot or two under his nose. So it's a lot bigger than it looks. But in this bottom, just beyond it, is a spring where fresh water comes out. You can still drink it. But this is the trail that goes down to a place called Skinny Dip Falls. Now, Skinny Dip Falls is the upper part after you get right there at the source of the East Fork. This is a series of falls. There's probably 6 or 7 of these falls in this cascade. This is a long run here that goes under the trail coming down to it, and goes for probably about maybe 50 or 60 feet down here. And it's maybe 7 or 8 feet deep. I've never been here any time that there wasn't at least 75 or 100 people down here fishing, not fishing, but swimming. And maybe a third of them will have no clothes on. A third will have some clothes on, and the others don't know what they've got on. I mean, it's a crazy place to kind of go, and you see all kind of people. But even though people would be swimming in this stretch, last time I was there about 2 months ago, Chris Sloan, the president of our TU chapter, never been here. So he was getting ready to walk over the bridge and bypass this and get up there away from all the people. I said, "Chris, come back, get right down here and roll cast that little caddis right up there next to that first fall coming out of the pool up here." First cast, an 11-inch brook trout. Bang, first cast brought him in. And there were at least 4 or 5 people within 10 feet of that fish. I went down immediately after him and cast a little caddis right up under the bridge. Chris was looking down from the bridge and could see what happened. All I could see was a flash, but another brook trout that he swore was at least 12 or 13 inches long came up and popped my caddis, and I missed it. But anyway, we left and started fishing our way upstream and just had a great time. It's not called, I mean, this is typically what you see. You see a lot of the natives there, clad or unclad, and it's just, well, it's an interesting place. And last year I was fishing through there, and for the first time in my fishing career, I caught a hellbender. And I don't know if any of you have ever caught a hellbender on a fly rod, but it's a religious experience because it will get your attention. And as I hoisted, this was about an 18-inch hellbender, Stephanie, and as I pulled this thing out of the water, there were probably 100, maybe 125 people in the creek below me and above me. Men were reaching for weapons, women screaming, babies crying, dogs barking, people running for cover. You would have thought I had pulled a 12-foot alligator out of the water. It scared people so bad. And so it was really a fun time. So I finally got my hare's ear out of his lips, slimy lips, and I turned him loose in the same spot that I got him, and then turned around and started fishing upstream. And about 45 minutes later, after I fished up through the third pool above me and started to get out of sight, I turned around and not a single person had gotten back in the water. So it was really an interesting time that most people have not seen these types of animals. And when you see it, it makes an impression on you. Up from Skinny Dip Falls, it's just a series of riffles, runs, and small pools up to Yellowstone Falls. And as you can see here, there's a huge rock garden below it. And all of these pools have at least one fish in it. And I just have the best time popping a couple of bugs in here, go to the next one, and just keep leapfrogging all through these pools that are in and around these rocks. And right on the other side of this is the drop pool for the falls here. And it is quite a beautiful place, as I'll show you. This is typical little rainbow. You can see this bug I'm fishing with here was about a 14, maybe a 12. It's a big bug, but you can see the fish had no problem going after it and getting hooked. This is the pool at the bottom of the falls I just showed you. This pool is probably in places 8 or 10 feet deep. This was taken in the late fall, where in the middle of the week where there just weren't a lot of people there. But on a pretty day, there'll be 75 or 100 people all over this thing. It's beautiful, and you can still catch fish in here. I have a doctor's appointment next week to see an orthopedic. I have fallen down the side of this thing twice. I don't learn very well. Wow. And I have busted myself twice. I have learned, though, that when you feel like you're going, I learned from an old fly fisherman years ago, when you start falling down a waterfall, throw your rod away from you. He said it's better to break your leg than your bamboo rod. And he's right. So anyway, I haven't broken anything, but I have messed up a couple of L5 vertebrae in my back. They have to get fixed. At the top of that falls is a little pool that you will always be able to kind of rappel down to, get behind this rock and just pop a couple of bugs in here. And there's always a couple of brook trout in there that I think get caught in there and they can't get out. I mean, in theory, they can scuttle up through here, but I don't think they do. They're always there, but it's a real cool place. That's just below this bridge here. This is the bridge coming down from a paved trail from the Blue Ridge Parkway up here. It's about a quarter of a mile, easy walk, and it's paved with asphalt all the way down to this bridge. And then you cross this is Yellowstone Prong, and then you get into a trail system in Graveyard Fields over here. That's really a great place. And this is a really good place to start fishing Yellowstone Prong right here. And I guarantee you nobody will be in your way. And as you turn around and start fishing upstream, the creek is very wide. You would think you're in Wyoming or something like that. You have cobble beaches over here with gravel and clear silica sand and great freestone rocks that have washed up. The water is really beautiful and tepid in color. You got all these rhododendrons and ashes and adders that the fish are hiding up under. And it's just loaded with little guys like that right there. That was a fish we caught last year in the fall. And you'll just catch a load of 6 to 8 4-inch brook trout that are painted up in their fall colors. And it's just, well, it's a religious experience. It's just a beautiful place. As you get above that, you get into the upper falls, and then that's really the end of what I consider to be the fishable water on Yellowstone Prong. So that's a general description of the East Prong watershed of the Pigeon River and some of the favorite places that I like to fish. I would encourage you, if you have not fished this water, it's what I call assisted living water. You can park on the Parkway and walk down an asphalt pathway and step into the creek and fish your way all the way to this point right here and not get much wet over your knees, and then take a great trail right back up to your car. Anyone can fish this and catch a load of fish every time you're there. So if there are any questions about the East Fork of the Yellowstone, East Fork of the Pigeon, or any of the tributaries I just described, shoot some questions. If not, or even during this, I'll be happy to answer. The next creek, and Stephanie, if you see a question, come in, just interrupt me. The next creek is Big Creek. Now, this is a little known creek that is one of the headwater creeks of the North Mills River. And the North Mills River feeds the Mills River, which is the second largest tributary going into the French Broad, just downstream from the Davidson River. But Big Creek is a very unique, and I'll show you the reason for that in just a minute. I rank it a 4. There is some hiking to get back into it, but it's a far service road that will take you to it. That's a great trail to get on, easy to walk. The gradient on average is about an 8.5, so it can be moderate to difficult once you get in the headwaters of it, because it flows for right at 2 miles. It flows for about 4 miles, but there's about a 2,000 foot elevation gain. So that's the reason for the 8.5 gradient. The species, again, rainbows, brookies, and browns. I'll give you all the access data. Okay, here's the layout. And here's why it's special. Buck Springs is a place on the Parkway just barely south of Mount Pisgah. In fact, the visitor parking area for it shares the parking area for the Mount Pisgah hike-in. So you can pull off and park there. And where you are there is where George Vanderbilt had his summer Sylvan estate. And he would take people from all over the world up to this 8,000 square foot Adirondack mansion perched up on the ledge up there, looking straight down Big Creek, all the way down to this point right here, which is where I'm calling the mouth of Big Creek. And that's a place called Hendersonville Reservoir. Now, in the middle of the national forest, the cradle of forestry for all practical purposes, is a reservoir that was built years ago that used to provide water to the city of Hendersonville. I'll show you images of it in just a minute. There are 3 of these reservoirs in this 86,000 acres that George Vanderbilt owned. These were built for the most part after Edith sold this property. but they're still there, and you can see them. And Big Creek starts about 500 feet below the Parkway and flows all the way down to the Hendersonville Reservoir. It's got several really good tributaries. It's got Horse Cove that comes off about 2 miles up. That's a really good stream. And then Bobby Cove comes off about 1.25 miles up. It's a really good. And then the final one is Bead Branch, which is my favorite one. I've never caught anything but brook trout on it. And it's relatively easy to fish. But along the 4.3 miles of Big Creek, it goes through some of the most historic national forest land east of the Mississippi River, because all of this land was the eastern edge of the cradle of forestry, where the forestry school, the first forestry schools in America, were held. George Vanderbilt, Chinook, and all those guys were part of that, started that. And this property was owned by George Vanderbilt. In fact, he could stand up there at Buck Springs and look all the way down and see his estate in Asheville. And he often said, "Everything that I see, I own." And I thought that's kind of cool. Now, let's look at this reservoir, and then I'll show you the creek. But this is looking across the dam, which is probably 20 yards across, 25 yards. There's what it looks like on the backside. This is stone. And when this water comes over from the two sources, the Fletcher Creek and Big Creek, form the North Mills River. From the moment that water hits down here, this begins the source of the North Mills River that flows down to the campground, which is the favorite delayed harvest stream that you all know about. The problem with this stream, and those of you who study this kind of stuff or have been around enough have already picked this up. The exit of this water coming out of this reservoir does not come out of the bottom. It comes across the top. So this water is warm water in the summer, flows down, and it warms the North Mills up to the point that I think the fish become very lethargic, and I just don't think it fishes very well in the summer. And the reason being is because it's feeding from the top instead of from below, where the water would be, in some cases, 10 or 15 degrees cooler. So I'm not advocating them blow this thing up, because I think it's a landmark, but there are pipes that come out of it that could feed from the bottom and just drain the lake, leave the lake, leave the dam here. So as you go upstream from the reservoir, this is what Big Creek looks like. It's pretty open. It's about 8 or 10 feet across. This is kind of low water for Big Creek, so it can be up to about 15 feet wide, up for several miles. It's a beautiful creek to fish. Typical brown trout will be 6 to 8 inches long, loaded with browns and rainbows in the lower stretches. Really great place to fish. As you get further up, you get into these rock gardens. That's a result of the splash dams that the forestry school created when they wanted to when they finally decided to cut some of the timber. They used a technique that had been used out west quite a bit and successfully, called splash dams. And what they do is cut all the timber, and then they build a big lake with logs, back the water up 15 or 20 feet deep, fill the lake up with logs, and then they dynamite the dam. And then all this stuff comes splashing downstream, and was supposed to go all the way to the North Mills and then the Mills River and then into the French Broad and then downstream to the sawmill. Well, that didn't happen. It got so clogged up that it flooded the whole bottom land of the Mills River and just did massive damage to farms, killed a bunch of cows, just destroyed livelihoods and everything. So they didn't do that again. But the result are these rock gardens that where the water washed these rocks down in the flood, and you can fish down between them. It's a pretty good place to fish. There's no little brook trout. As you get up to the Parkway, you'll crawl up onto this Buck Springs Lodge overlook. This is where George and Edith Vanderbilt would sit. And at that time, these trees weren't here, and you could see their estate down in Asheville right over there. And they would sit up here and entertain their friends from all over the world. And, that was the world of the rich and famous back in those days. But now you can walk up here, and many times I have exited that watershed to come up here, and there would be tables set up from people from Asheville or Hendersonville, and they'd be having a wine tasting or a buffet or some kind of something with white tablecloths and everything, and just be having a grand time. And I've learned too that if you just stand around and look tired enough, they will offer you a drink and something to eat, because they want to know where did you come from? And so you wind up being the star of the show and get fed and drank very, very well. So don't be surprised if that happens to you. It's happened to me at least 3 times. This is George Vanderbilt's Buck Springs Lodge. This was sitting right beside the Blue Ridge Parkway in the early part or the middle part of the last century, when Edith Vanderbilt had sold the 86,000 acres below it and had kept 300 acres out around Buck Springs Lodge so she could continue to visit all the way up into the mid part of the last century. And when she died, it was by law or by decree went to the National Park Service. And so this is what it looked like. Here's a better picture looking from the left or looking from the east. This was a dining porch. This was a kitchen back over here. And these were all sleeping rooms. And then they had a big open veranda area back through here with a big fireplace and everything. About 8,000 square feet as I understand it. The only thing left today, because when this went to the Park Service, guess what? What did they do? They tore it down. Of course, that's what they did. Well, they don't do that kind of stuff anymore. They preserve this kind of thing. But unfortunately, back in those days, they were wanting to get rid of it and just turn it back to natural mountainside. Well, about 10 years ago, a group of people got together and petitioned the Park Service to let them go in there in concert with the Park Service, survey the area, cut all of the trees and rhododendrons and laurel back and expose the foundations and the pads for this building. And they've done that. So you can now walk and see some of the foundation stones. Of course, you can see the terrace and everything and see where George and Edith hung out. The only thing on site that's still there is the spring house. And this is sitting literally beside the parkway. And you can see this if you know where to look. It's 50 feet off the parkway. You can park right there at the entrance going up into the parking area, and you can walk into this spring house and drink the same water that George and Edith Vanderbilt and all the rich and famous people from around the world drank, because this is where the water was piped from this spring house uphill, and the Adirondack structure was sitting right up here. But the only thing left is this. So I thought it was kind of cool. Took a picture of it, put it in a book. Every time I'm there, I stop there and go in there and drink a little water. It makes me feel like I got more money than I really do. So that's all I'm going to say about Big Creek. It's a really good creek, very historic. I think you'll enjoy it if you fish it. Another creek that's closer to you is Buck's Timber Branch. And this is on the south face of Grandfather Mountain. I rank it a 4. It's one of the major tributaries of Wilson Creek. It's got about an 8.3 gradient, about Big Creek. And it runs for about 3 miles. It can be moderate to difficult. And again, it's got brook, browns, and rainbows in it. Mostly brook and rainbows is what I found in it. It starts, here's the Lincoln Viaduct. The red is the Blue Ridge Parkway, of course. There's Grandfather Mountain right here. And here's Blowing Rock and Boone and all that. Well, Buck's Timber, it starts right up under the parkway, about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile below the parkway, and runs all the way down to its confluence with Wilson Creek, which starts right up here. and flows all the way down the valley. And by then, it's becoming a pretty good sized river. Well, Buck's Timber, it runs for 3 miles, and you hike down to it from this Forest Service road that goes down to Edgemont and Mortimer. And it's an easy hike to get down there. And once you get down there, there are 2 really good tributaries. You got Cary Flat Branch, and you've got another one coming down from Grag, which are the people, or development, not development, but a kind of a homestead of the people who own most of the south face of Grandfather Mountain, as I understand it. But this is another good brook trout creek right here. This is a good fishing creek. It was clear cut. The entire south face of Grandfather, as you may know, the Ritter Lumber Company clear cut it in the early part of the last century. And right after they clear cut it, and they were doing all the logging operations, excuse me, from Mortimer and Edgemont, where they had a massive sawmill set up on Wilson Creek, and even a train, narrow gauge train that serviced several of the local towns and was used to bring the wood down from the mountain. But they clear cut it. Well, after they clear cut it, a fire came through and burned about 90% of all of the tops of the trees and all the brush and rhododendron and laurel and anything that was left. It killed it. So there was nothing left to hold the ground on the south face of Grandfather Mountain. And as things would have it, a hurricane remnant came up through the Carolinas and dumped about 30 inches of rain over a couple of days over this region, and it just turned it into sludge. And there were places on Wilson Creek that the flood stage was at 90 feet. And so both of those little towns were devastated, as well as the sawmill and a couple of little minor factories, textile factories that were down there. There was a CCC camp there also. And so a lot of it was built back. Well, the same darn thing happened again, I think it's right after World War II. And that time it's turned those towns into ghost towns. So you can drive down there now, and other than the general store and a campground and just a few cabins and things like that, and a big fishing club like you guys, there's not much there anymore. But it's a very interesting place to go, and there are huge fish in the river there. I am going to petition the National Park Service to change the name of this creek from Buck's Timber Branch to Buck's Timber Rattler Branch, Stephanie, because as long as I've been fishing in these mountains, the only place I encounter timber rattlers is on Buck's Timber Branch. And so they're beautiful little snakes. This is one I took an image of last year, walking down the trail down to it. He's sitting up under a log about a foot off the trail. Didn't bug me. I didn't bug him, but I did take his picture. But after 3 or 4 of these over the last 30 years, and there's a story behind this, why they're all there. I think it changed name. This is what Buck's Timber looks like, very much like Wilson, the same stream structure as Wilson and Stack Rock. Because of the flooding, a lot of rock gardens, a lot of pools that hold trout, typical brown trout that I caught in there. The upper part of it, right under the Forest Service roads where you can put in, this is yours truly fishing, and you can see just how beautiful it is up there. Again, you think you're in Ireland or Scotland chasing brown trout over there. Great place. So the last creek I want to tell you about is a creek that I would hope some or all of you know about, and it's a creek called Bullhead Creek. It's in Stone Mountain State Park, on the north side of Stone Mountain State Park. A lot of people disagree with me here with my ranking. All of the locals up there would disagree and rank it a 1 or 2 at best. But I think it's a 4 because I always catch a lot of fish on it. It's medium as it joins Stone Mountain Creek, and it doubles the size of Stone Mountain Creek that flows around the north side of Stone Mountain State Park, or Stone Mountain, the rock. 2 tributaries that both are fished pretty well. Again, the grade can get kind of steep as you get toward the top, but you don't have to fish that far up if you don't want to over the 3.9 miles that it runs. And again, you'll catch all three species on there. The interesting thing, there are two things I want to tell you about Bullhead. One is that it starts up here at a place called Mahogany Rock, and it flows from Mahogany Rock all the way down to Stone Mountain State Park. Well, it was up here that the sky tram ran. It ran from between the top of Mahogany Rock, which the concrete slab is still there, to Devil's Garden Peak, which there is a concrete slab still there that's probably 20 yards square. And there's a road you can get up there to it on both of these. But he had a sky tram, gondolas that ran back and forth throughout the day over this watershed. And at the highest point, they were about 400 feet above the headwaters of of Bullhead Creek. So you had this big tourist attraction going back and forth, and you could have people down here fishing. Well, on the headwaters, that's what was going on back in the 60s and 70s. Earlier than that, though, down closer to the mouth where it's bigger, a family still owned this property down here. And I don't know how much of this property they own, but they own a bunch of it. And they decided they were going to have it as a pay-for-fish venue. So they started charging people to fish a section of Bullhead Creek, and they were feeding the fish. And they really took good care of them. Like all these places where they feed fish, the fish would get up anywhere from 18, 20, 25 inches long. They were typhoon class submarine size. They were huge. And they would feed these fish, guard them, kiss them, put them to bed at night, make sure nobody messed with them. And you'd pay like, I don't know, $5 or $10 to fish along a stretch for a period of time. Well, this went on for years. Well, as people got old, they wanted to turn it over to their kids. And the story goes that the kids said, well, you know what, we live in Charlotte now, or we live in Raleigh, or we live in Asheville, or we live in Nashville, or Dahlonega, Georgia, close to Sam Johnson. I don't want to drive up here and have to put up with all this. Why don't we just sell it to the state and as part of Stone Mountain State Park? And they did, with the understanding that the state supposedly would continue to feed the fish and operate it as a pay-for-fish venue within the state boundaries. Well, the state did for a while, as I understand, but then the state decided the same thing. This is a bunch of trouble, and really it's not worth the trouble. We're going to quit doing this. And apparently there were a lack of covenants in the agreement where they could do it, and they did. And so all the big fish either died or were caught out or poached out. And now it's just a wild stream that you can go in there and catch some pretty nice fish, because the stream structure is really good and acclimates it well. The entomology, as you're getting up this far up the Parkway, starts getting better, and the fish start getting bigger too. But every time I'm hiking in and I see someone that it looks like a local, and I'll ask them, well, how'd you do today? And every time they say, well, it just doesn't fish like it used to. And so I know where they're coming from with that. But anyway, that creek comes down from Mahogany Rock and flows all the way down to Stone Mountain Creek at Stone Mountain State Park. Rich Mountain Creek is its first tributary, and Horse Cove, which is my favorite part of the whole creek watershed, is its last major tributary that comes up through there. And for 3.9 miles it flows, and the majority of that is fishable. There's another image of the tram that went across. A guy by the name of Worth Folger had no connections with the coffee people, I don't think. Maybe he went into coffee business when he went out of business. But the National Park Service, the Blue Ridge Parkway, told him, you got to take your signs off the Parkway, and we're not going to direct traffic for you anymore. And nobody's going to park on the side of the Parkway, or we're going to write them tickets. Well, when they started doing all that and people couldn't find it or couldn't stop, he decided this is a losing proposition. I'm going to go out of business. And so he worked a deal with the Parkway and sold them the property. So now I think it's actually part of the Blue Ridge Parkway right away as it is now. But the tram is down, the pads are still there, and Worth Folger and his family are probably better off, I guess. I hope so anyway. Great visionary. Part of the way up Bullhead, if you turn around, there's one little clearing up there. It looks like a feed plot to me. You turn around and there's the north side of Stone Mountain State Park. Now, I live in Georgia and we have a Stone Mountain down here also. And I see a whole lot of similarity here, except yours has got more trees on it and doesn't have a carving on it. But the structure, from the standpoint of geology, it is the same type of structure as the Stone Mountain in Georgia. And according to the geologist, they are the two of the largest of their kind in the world. This thing is massive as it goes underground. So it's just a beautiful view, great place to fish. There's Bullhead as it comes under the perimeter road on the north side of Stone Mountain itself. And here's Stone Mountain Creek coming in from the east. And as you can see, it's actually bigger than the stream is flowing into, and it doubles the size of it. But I mean, from right here all the way up under the bridge, great trail system. You can catch fish all the way up. I mean, here's another little brown trout caught about 3/4 of a mile up. You can see how beautiful it is up there. There's yours truly. I fish wet a lot. I mean, even like last week when I was fishing Wilson Creek and Stack Rock, the middle prong of the New River from Blowing Rock up to Boone, and then the delayed harvest section of the Watauga in Valley Crucis. I'm fishing wet. I had long pants on, but I was fishing wet, and I just really like the flexibility of doing that. I got a high tolerance for cold water, and I just enjoy doing it. And that's what I was after right there. And this was about a little 7-inch brook trout. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful fish. If you like these little critters like I do, you can see that little improved caddis right there, little red. You can see the tippet coming out right here. Typically 6X is what I fish with. When I add tippet and then just a tapered leader. And that's what I do. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my presentation. I'm open for any questions that you got. If you want my book, go to wildbearings.com or an outfitter close to you. You can get it on Amazon, but I'm like most people, I'm not a big Amazon fan, and I'm probably going to pull my books off Amazon to support the outfitters that are out there and to support other retailers that are selling my book. But anyway, Stephanie, that's my story.
That was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Great information. I can't wait to get your book and start exploring some of these rivers. I'm curious, how did you use any sort of criteria when you were choosing the rivers as far as proximity to the parkway?
I did. That's a great question. There's very little water there are very little rivers and streams that are fishable that literally cross the parkway. My criteria was, did it source on the parkway right away? Or can you walk to it or hike to it from the parkway? Or is there an access road that reasonably easily accesses the creek? Like Bullhead Creek, where you can get to the headwaters of Bullhead Creek from the parkway, but if you want to get to the mouth, you got to take Highway 26 or whatever it is down, and then go to Stone Mountain State Park and then access it from there. But it's only about a 20-minute ride to do that. So my criteria was, does it source on the parkway, or is it reasonably easy to get to from the parkway because the watershed comes off the parkway? That was my criteria.
Okay. Yeah, it seemed like most of them were within, a short walk or maybe even up to a half a mile, quarter mile, small hike.
That's true. And the other criteria, and I think this is important for all of you that are watching this, the main criteria was, have I fished this creek,
Mhm.
or river or stream? And with the exception of two or three of these, I have personally fished it multiple times over the last 45 or 50 years that I've been fly fishing. So
Wow.
I've got my descriptions are my descriptions. You know, you may fish it and say, well, you know what, that's not really the way I see it. Well, I understand that, but the title of this book is an almost accurate description. so, my publisher scratched his and her head about that and said, I don't know about that. And I said, no, I know fly fishermen. And if I put a description of, somebody's going to say, yeah, but that's not exactly the way it is. So I put an almost accurate description.
That kind of segues into George's question here. He rides bikes through the Bragg, Mortimer, and Wilson areas, and he passes all sorts of creeks. Do you think that some of those other creeks that you didn't mention hold fish in them?
Absolutely, they do. They're just not ones that I've spent a lot of time on or I had time to put in the book. I listed the ones that I personally fished. Um, that as well as just the amount of paper you can put in a book. It already has 308 pages, and I have a tendency to want to cram in as many as I could. But I tried to pick what I consider to be the best ones that I had firsthand experience with. But by all means, George, you pass one of these streams that looks big enough to hold a trout. If it's not on private water, by all means, I would do that. I drive my wife crazy all the time driving, because I'll be looking at my topo map on my GPS as we're driving. And if we pass a creek that I've never fished before, you know, I'm looking over the edge of the road, slowing down and getting crazy. And if I think it's something that makes sense, I'll stop and I'll whoop down the side of the right of way down into the culvert to try to get a feel for what's down here. And if it looks fishable, I come back and bookmark it on my GPS, and I'll come back and fish it. And
Yeah.
and so I love doing that, and I encourage you to do that, because there are other waters and many other waters along the Parkway that are highly fishable.
Yeah, yeah, I was actually just it was late July, early August, hiking Graveyard Fields like you mentioned earlier, and took my kids to swim at that Second Falls,
Yeah.
just as you spoke about, and we, picked wild blueberries and blackberries on our hike, and I passed two other fishermen there. So I thought it was very neat. I had just a quick chat with them, and they were catching. And that's the first, I've lived in Hendersonville for 10
Yeah.
years, and I've hiked it multiple times, and that was the first time I had run into people fishing there. So
Yep.
thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I can't wait to get out there again and take a pull this time.
Well,
Um,
that's what the book is all about. It's just to help people, number one, know something about the Parkway and to promote the Parkway, because I am giving a portion of the profits, up to 10% of the profits, to the Parkway Foundation. And by the way, next year I'm going to reach out to you guys, because the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation and Orvis had our first annual fly fishing um, uh, trophy tournament about 2 weeks ago, in the middle of a rainstorm. Thank you, up in Blowing Rock, and we will be having another one next year. And boy, did we have fun. And so you're going to see more about that. And if you're interested, please plan on participating in that.
yeah, yeah, keep us in the loop, and I'll get the word out. That'd be great. I just have one last question, and it's on safety. Have you ever run into, some animals out there? Do you carry bear spray or a sidearm, or how often do you run into some of the wild animals?
I know you're not supposed to do it, but I didn't get to be 67 years old by not being reasonably cautious. I'm packing every time I go in there.
Mhm. Yeah.
When I go back in the back, because I fish a lot by myself, because most of my friends won't go with me because of the places I go. So my wife and kids said, okay, if you're going to keep doing this, we're going to give you a transponding GPS that can go on your fishing pack that tells them exactly where I am on Google Earth at any given time, along with an emergency punch button if I needed help. But from the standpoint of a weapon, yeah, I carry a weapon.
Okay.
Have I ever had problems? I've been snake bit, copperhead bit. I've been bitten 7 times by brown recluses that got in my waders one night in the campsite.
Oh, wow.
I've never had any encounter with a bear. I've seen bear, not a lot of them, but I've been around bear. I've seen bear with cubs 50 or 75 yards upstream where I was downwind, which was the safe place to be. But I've never had any encounter with any other wildlife that I felt threatened. But I would say this, anywhere you go in these mountains, the top of the food chain are the bear, and they're out there. And if you have a fish on, and they could see that fish break the surface, they may come for it. And the first thing you got to do is just cut that fish off and back away. I don't carry bear spray. I probably should, but I do carry a large caliber weapon. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? You know, like a 470 Nitro Express. But I do carry something with a little bit of knockdown power, and I know you're not supposed to, but I do anyway. Sorry.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Josh wants to know how if we want to fish with you, how do we get on your short list?
Look, go to my website and email me. I mean, my email for this whole project and everything I'm doing is sam@wildbearings.com. And like last weekend, I did a webinar last weekend for a group on Wednesday, like tonight, and I invited several people. You know, hey, here's where we're going to be on the Blue Ridge Parkway Friday through Sunday. If you want to come fish with us, come. But if you'll reach out to me, if you're going fishing up in that area, and if you let me know you want to go fishing with me, I'll reach out to you and let you know when I'm going to be in the area and what I'm going to be doing. I just, you know, I'm a full contact fisher guy. I mean, I'm always bruised and cut and and hurt, you know, because of it. But I'm going to do it as long as I can, and I'm in really good. I say I'm in good shape. I think I'm in pretty good shape according to my doctor. And I'm going to do it as long as I can. And I think that's going to be a long time. So if we go fishing, depending on where we go, just be prepared to, you know, we may be bushwhacking 1.5 miles or 2 miles cross country into some headwater that I've surveyed using Topo USA, and chase wild fish, because I love to catch wild fish. I'm not into catching stalkers like delayed harvest. Last weekend, we were fishing part of the Sunday. We were fishing the delayed harvest on Watauga, and it's like, you know, got to do this. And I caught some beautiful fish, but it's like assisted living fishing to me. I just don't get a thrill out of catching a fish that's hair lipped, that's been caught 4 times that day. And when you catch him, he's looking at you thinking, "Are you going to let me go this time like everyone else?" I mean, I don't have anything against that, and I'm glad they do that, but I just really have a passion for chasing wild fish.
Sure. Nothing beats those colors.
Yeah, they really do, especially this time of the year on those brook trout and brown trout.
Yep. One last question here from Bill. What roads can you take near to get on and off the Parkway that don't have steep grades around Asheville area?
Around Asheville to get on the Parkway? Well, you can take 25 south out of Biltmore Village about 3 miles, and you can access the Parkway just on an access road that's no more than just a bridge over 25. Same thing with the Bat Cave Road. Same thing in East Asheville. The Parkway goes up the east side of Asheville, and there's just an access road there right by the Folk Arts Center that I'm a member of, and you can get on it there. Those from Asheville, those would be the two closest. Now, if you want to go west on 26 or west on 40, when you pass Waynesville, after 40 splits off north, right past Waynesville, the Parkway comes down from Cherokee, and you can get on it right there, and it's not steep at all. So those two are really, those areas that I gave you are very easy access from suburban areas right onto the Blue Ridge Parkway.
All right. Any other questions? All right. If not, Sam, thank you so much. This was wonderful. To all the members, I'm going to be doing a drawing, just a random drawing, and selecting 2 members to give away books to. And again, go buy Sam's book. He'll autograph it for you.
Well, let me know if you order on my site. Make sure in the little notes on the order form, just put in there, that you were on the webinar and a member of the Carolina Fly Fishing Club, and I'll be happy to sign it. Maybe put a little note or something there about what a great fisherman you are, and I've never seen anyone can fish like you can. You show it to your wife or husband and get points.
Yep. All right. Thanks so much, Sam. I really appreciate it. This was fantastic.
Thanks, guys and gals. I hope to see you on the stream sometime.